Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding.
Hello and welcome to Nonprofit Everything, a podcast where we answer your questions about everything nonprofit. I'm Andy Shurick.
I'm Stacey Wedding.
And let's get started. So our first question. So we want to modify the name of our nonprofit from Child Refugee Ministries to Child Refugee Foundation. We are not an organization that grants funds, as many family foundations are, which use that term foundation. Instead, we are an organization that raises funds to support a program that helps refugee children from Syria and South Sudan get to safety. Is it confusing/misleading to use the word foundation in our potentially new name? And would it be better to use a different name? What do you think, Stacey?
Well, questions always raise other questions, right, Andy? So one of the things here is I want to know what sort of was the impetus or the driver for wanting a name change to begin with. And because we don't have the person, but that's something that if the person were here, I'd really want to understand, is this just oftentimes happens, you get new board members and they're trying to leave their mark. And what is the most common thing? Let's change our name. Let's change our website. Let's do, right?
It's always the website.
It's the website. It's the website curse, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, but with that said, so what is the driver? And so, but let's set that aside for a minute. I have really strong feelings about it because I've seen organizations set up with foundation in their name, and they never are able to overcome the confusion that comes from that. Because foundation, generally speaking, if you're not granting funds, it still has that feeling for people, right? That's the definition of foundation, sort of grant-making entity, is what people naturally think of. So when you add foundation to your name, I think it makes fundraising more difficult, and you add this whole layer of complexity of trying to explain, well, we're not really a foundation, but, the name is this. It's kind of it's just a weird anomaly, and yet organizations somehow feel like it will attract more money, but it does just the opposite, especially when you look at even you're applying for grants, and one of the questions is, or one of the criteria is, we don't give to foundations. So good luck trying to explain, well, our name is such and such foundation, right? But no, we're really not a foundation. And anyway, so it's just, I could go on and on about it, but I would caution against it. Yeah,
I don't have anything to add except for I agree with you completely. And I don't know why it's that. So the IRS has there's no official definition for foundation. You can call anything a foundation. It can be a for-profit and be called the foundation.
Yes.
So whatever foundation. It doesn't mean it's a nonprofit, and it just to your point, it just confuses people. So why do it?
Yeah. Exactly. So might be room for some discussion. And I think there's a lot of people out there. I'd encourage this organization to perhaps talk to peers that are nonprofit entities that have added foundation at the end and find out how that's worked for them, because I've never heard positives related to this. The only potential exception is if there was some grant-making activity with the organization, like it's a sort of hybrid where they're raising funds, and we all know of those, right? They're raising funds, but they're also giving funds away. It still gets complicated too, though. So in donors' minds, I go keep it simple.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm on the marketing side of my nonprofit, and it's a constant struggle to get the development side to see eye to eye with us. They always think we're trying to tell them how to do their job, but we're really just trying to help. Development treats us as an afterthought during fundraising campaigns, so we get content from them that was made without the nuances we understand in mind. They just want us to make the ask anywhere and everywhere without building a compelling story around it. Anyway, do others have challenges? What is the solution? I would love to be an integrated front and wish they'd see the value of our expertise.
This is such a good question. And I think this has come up at every single nonprofit I've ever worked at, every single one. Marketing and fundraising should never be separate. Like, my opinion, there's no reason at all that those should be two distinct groups that need to report to different people. They need to all report to the same person, regardless if that person's called the chief development officer, chief marketing officer, chief executive officer, it doesn't matter who it is, as long as they report to one person who feels ownership over both of those sides. Because they do. They're two totally different things. The fundraising people know tons about fundraising. The marketing people know tons about marketing. And they have to work together because what they're doing is eventually supposed to be raising money for the nonprofit. If it's not doing that, they're not doing anything right. So, in previous experience, my go-to strategy to get them work together would be to just like grab them by the hair and knock their heads together until they started to do it.
How did that work for you?
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I've had some good advice from people too, because I've had asked the same question of people over the years, like how on earth? And I got there are two really good pieces of advice. The first one is to remember that you're not the target market. That by virtue of being inside the nonprofit, seeing everything that goes on in the charity and knowing how everything works, that a direct mail piece, for example, or a social media post that's asking for money is not directed at you. You know too much. It's directed to somebody else who hasn't engaged with the nonprofit yet. Mm-hmm. One of the things in the question was like how to build a compelling story around it, right? And the fundraising people should understand that. If they don't understand that, they need to go get their development textbook out. They need to go look online and see like what fundraising really means. It's less about getting people just mail in their house and a lot more about telling a compelling story. And if the fundraising side doesn't get that and they're not doing that, then the marketing people need to come down hard on them. People don't necessarily have to be good at both of them, but you need both of those pieces put together really, really well if you're going to do a good job raising money. You have to.
I feel like when I heard this question, what came to my mind was, what is this culture in this organization? And so looking at it from a broader perspective of kind of respecting each other's differences and strengths and figuring out how you create more of a team atmosphere. And so that's a bigger picture thing that probably doesn't help the person writing this question immediately, although they could be part of that solution with some recommendations about what if we did kind of a brainstorm retreat with marketing and fundraising together? What if we do some shared goal setting this next year or for the rest of this year, right? That we figure out where are we trying to go and how are we each going to use kind of our respective areas to get there? Because like you said, you need both. But I think, again, if there's not sort of that shared vision and shared goal setting, then you've got marketing who's beating to one drummer, and and fundraising who's doing something totally different. And then they become almost competing with each other instead of helping each other. Yeah. So I just wonder how that would help, like having, and it doesn't even have to be someone where you bring an outside expert in. I mean, have make it fun, have some fun element, get to know each other a little bit more. I think both also kind of doing sort of a here's what I bring, kind of a strengths assessment, where it's just sort of like I've seen some cool things done where you can get together at a retreat and really talk a little bit about what you value or the expertise you value with another coworker and how does that help? And once people start talking through it and then realizing, wow, these people are key to me being successful in reaching the fundraising goal, and these people are key to me being successful in reaching marketing goals, and hopefully all of that's driving revenue and awareness building for the nonprofit. I mean, it kind of becomes a win-win, and then you build more of a team structure. Also think like from an executive level and thinking about culture, perhaps there's opportunity when you're doing reviews or evaluations of employees to think about how you set goals where it's not siloed and compartmentalized, that marketing has one set of goals and fundraising has another and finance has another, but everybody, if the team is working well together, you need all parts to be successful in really all aspects of the organization.
Right.
So how do you measure success as an organization, and how does that even show up in job, evaluations, annual performance reviews? So then everyone is kind of working in the same unified direction, and it's not pointing fingers or saying, "Oh, we did well, and you fell down in the process." Right. So I don't know. I mean, and is that too? I would say to you, Andy, does that sound too fluffy? What I just said, or do you think there's some
I think you're right on. It reminded me of sitting in staff meetings where everybody's supposed to report on their results, and the fundraising people would get up and they would talk about here's where we are and this is what our goal is supposed to be, and this is why we haven't met our goal, right? and then the marketing people would get up and they'd go, okay, we got 8 jillion clicks and 42 jillion likes, and they shared our content 82 times, and those are those metrics are nice,
Right.
but they need to support each other.
Absolutely.
Like, so if the marketing team is feeling like they're hitting it out of the park with all of the metrics that they're tracking, but the fundraising team isn't meeting their goals, like, to your point, that if it's not integrated, you're not winning. You're not doing your job.
Yeah.
You guys need to be working together. So they're coming up with those big picture goals and then figuring out how each individual component fits in properly so that when you report that you're all reporting on the same thing.
Absolutely.
I've also had, CDOs that have told me, like, I don't do marketing. I don't know anything about marketing. I only do fundraising. And, again, you just hired the wrong person. Like, if you don't think you know marketing, but you're a development person, like, you need to figure that out. Or you need to hire
or at least
somebody
the basics, right?
or hire somebody that's really smart that you trust, that can do it for you, and then you can nod when they talk. But yeah, whoever's in charge of it needs to have a pretty good handle on how everything works. You can't just decide, well, I don't care about marketing.
This made me nervous, this question, when they talked about the development people just want to make the ask and, kind of do that all the time. I thought,
Right.
Yikes. Okay, then somewhere along the way, either there's a perception of that, which isn't good, or
Right.
if that is the reality, then yes, development people, I want, good fundraisers are amazing storytellers. And think about how if they worked with professional marketers, how much they could craft a really compelling story that kind of takes the expertise of both and moves it toward engaging that donor further, or
I'd like to see the same question written by the perspective of the fundraising person, because it would probably be the exact same thing.
probably
It's
would.
it's like the marketing team is really only about awareness, and all
Yeah.
they think that awareness pays the bills, and it doesn't. That all we need to raise money, and everything that they want to do has more about like making sure that people recognize our logo.
And you know what would be really funny? Let's just add a third dimension and put the finance person in here who absolutely usually is at the polar opposite. And I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you when I say this, saying Mr. CFO, but I'm sitting there going, who's absolutely, why do the development marketing people need such big budgets? Why are they always spending money? How long does it take to get return on that investment? So it'd be fun to add that dimension in here too.
So I was definitely a different kind of CFO. I was on the spend. You have to spend money to make money.
Yay.
I understood that.
You were one of the good ones.
Yeah, I was always a friend of the development department, which
that's
was
rare.
good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the finance people. It's not even. We'll answer this question when someone
Yes.
asks it. We'll leave that one for.
We will, 'cause
We'll leave
that's
that
a
one for
whole other-
later. It'll come up. Somebody will say, "Well, tell me about direct mail
Yes.
acquisition campaigns," and so we'll add that one
Yes.
later when someone asks. So if you have that question, just be sure to write it in.
Yeah, we would love your questions.
We'd love that question. We want to answer that one. Okay, here's our next one. We'd love to involve some individuals in our nonprofit's board, but we'd like to keep our board of directors at a constant of 5 people to avoid ever being swayed from our chosen path as an organization, in case people ever wanted to vote each other out and such. We want to allow additional people to be in a sub-board, as I'd imagine, where they have roles and such, but no power to vote the head board off the board, so they have a bed. The head board, it's not a nonprofit, it's a bed. So no power to vote the head board off the board. I think they mean like maybe the chair?
Yes, that's what
okay,
I'm
so
thinking
vote
they
the
mean.
chair off the board of the directors. Is this a thing in the nonprofit world? Is this feasible? We just hate to bring in people who end up trying to guide our mission off the righteous path, but still want to strengthen our organization's key players. So what do you think, Stacey?
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on this one. One of the questions, obviously, I assume that, as you said, head board, meaning the board chair. And I'm just wondering, does a nonprofit have bylaws, and what kind of bylaws and policies does it have in place about structure and how the board is structured and how people get approved to the board and how they get, quote, as this person says, voted off? Because my concern is it shouldn't be easy to just vote somebody off of a board. Right. So that's the other, and it almost feels a little, like there's some fear of having too many people involved or too large a board, because the larger the board, the more there's sort of opportunity for the board to, go in a different direction. And that I think is common among nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
At least the ones I talk to are always worried a bit about that. And, then that leads to what kind of is there a strategic plan that the board helped work on, right? And have ownership.
Is there a mission?
Yeah.
Would you start there?
Right. Yeah. What's the mission? And where are you trying to go and how are you going to get there? And then once you've got that board buy-in, then doesn't that just make it that much easier to keep the board focused on, hey, we all agreed to this, what's going on here? So I also think that perhaps there's some room for exploring why it needs to just be a board of 5.
Right.
Like, does it need to be, when you think about nonprofits, how large is this nonprofit? And I'm not one that says there's not a perfect number for a board. And a board size, the average nationally is 15. And yet you want a board that's large enough, right, to have the diversity of skills and expertise and connections to help your organization. And yet small enough to still manage, depending on who you are, if you're an all-volunteer organization. So I'd also push back a little bit on why does it have to be limited to 5 if you've got, bylaws in place, the policies about how the board handles itself in place, the strategic plan, the mission, and the strategic plan in place, then those are some of your safeguards against it kind of going off the rails, which is what I feel this person's a little concerned about.
Yeah.
And how do we mix it up with, can it be more than 5 board members? What do you think?
Well, yeah. So the way the question's written, especially because there are a couple of terms in there that aren't typical nonprofit terms, like sub-board. We might call something an advisory board. So if you want somebody to be involved, but you don't want them to have a vote, you might create an advisory board. But they don't say advisory board, they say sub-board. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is that they didn't know that the board chair is called the board chair.
Right.
They call it the head board, which is not a thing.
No. Like you said, it's like a bed.
Yeah, maybe it's wondering what this nonprofit could actually be about. Yeah. So it sounds like they're at the beginning of their nonprofit journey and probably have an awful lot of stuff to learn. And which means they don't have a lot of those things in place that you just said. I'm guessing they probably don't have a mission that's really clear. I'm going to say they totally don't have a strategic plan, all of these bits and pieces. They may not have staff. So trying to sort of figure out where you're going to go next, and then you can sort of bring those pieces on. And don't worry about bringing people on that don't fit your mission, because they're going to fade away anyway. Mm-hmm. If you want, why are you expanding the board to begin with? Is it because you want to bring on additional resources? Do you want them to bring more cash with them? What's the purpose for expanding the board? But to your point about the board size, as long as it's bigger than 3, and I personally think that there's an upper end to a functional board that has more to do with can we get quorum at board meetings than it does about other things. But we've seen really, really huge boards. But I think that's,
I wonder if I would love to see this organization, if they could spend even just a few hours sort of mapping out the clear mission and where they're headed, even in the next year, to give them some direction to help them then decide, do they need to expand the board? And if they do expand the board, then how are they doing it strategically, right? So I think it's the piece that we all get so busy, and especially a startup organization, they're trying to wear 100 hats and do everything. But without starting at that point of making sure everyone's on the same page, this is where issues, come out and where organizations run into issues. And before creating that, quote, sub-board or advisory board. And by the way, I would never call a board an advisory board. That's probably a question or a topic for another day, but so that's, before doing that, I'm just thinking, okay, that creates yet another body of people to manage. And if you're a small organization already, maybe it's about careful strategic expansion of your board, even if it's from 5 to 7, but 7 people. But again, I think it's driven by where are we trying to go and what do we need? What connections do we need to get there, right? What expertise do we need to get there? What could really help us at this stage of our development? Do we need someone who's kind of like the builder of something like an entrepreneur versus someone who really likes systems in place? Because this sounds very startup, and that's okay, but how do you get people who are comfortable with that messiness?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think one more comment about advisory boards. Hopefully we get that question later on, but just a personal experience, not that long ago, maybe a year ago, somebody actually called me to ask me if I would be on one of their committees, their board committees. And I asked, is this a board position? And they said, no, we just want you to be on the committee. And my answer was no. So I don't know what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to access my expertise, just call me. Don't make me have to go sit through a bunch of finance committee meetings to find out what I think. If you have questions, just send me this stuff and I will answer it for you. But don't make me have a giant time commitment and then say, but you're not really on the, not important enough to be on the board. That's just straight up insulting, to be honest.
Yes, it is. interning at a nonprofit for 6 months, and I'm a recent college graduate. My bosses know that I'm currently job searching and desperate for a job. My boss is pleased with my outcomes and wants to offer a paid position as a consultant or analyst for one of the projects I'm working on. Since I know our organization is a small nonprofit, I'm not sure how much to ask for salary and how to even go about it. My bare minimum salary would need to be around $35,000 in order to cover living expenses, student loans, etc. Do you guys have any experience with this or any advice on how I should go about it? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a good problem to have, honestly, if somebody wants to hire you, because you're already kind of in a good negotiating position because they want to give you the job. So probably the smart thing to do is to just ask what you need. If your bare minimum is $35,000, figure out what you think the job is worth and how much you want to get paid for it, and then ask for that. And if they can't do it, that's the way the ball bounces, right? Nonprofits typically have lots of restrictions, as you probably know, on what they can pay and how much they can pay and the benefits that you're going to get. And so you kind of have to take into consideration if you're willing to sacrifice some of that salary for working someplace where you're valued and you feel good about the mission and you're excited about going to work every day. That's something that comes up all the time. Sadly, the comparative positions between the nonprofit and for-profit sectors are never paid the same. You could get the same job doing the exact same stuff at a different company. You get paid way more. One day maybe we'll get that changed, but probably not any day soon. But just be honest with yourself about how much is this job worth to you? And if really $35,000 is your bare minimum for that job, go in with open eyes and say, $35,000 is my bare minimum for this job. And if he says sorry or she says sorry, I can't do that, then you go from there. What do you think?
I think I totally agree with that. I also think I would appreciate if I were the boss having someone who put some thought into, did they do some comparative analysis? Did they make my job any easier? Did they look at maybe there's nonprofit, compensation studies out there, some that are accessible online. And so did they do a little homework to say, to justify justify here's what this position generally makes, here's what it makes even in our general sort of region. And while I'm starting lower, higher than that, here's how I will perform. And here's, I want to make sure, I'm committed. And here's some goals I would even set for myself. So someone who shows the ambition, I think I would be a little bit perturbed if I got someone who came in and just said, hey, I need 35 and kind of just sat there almost expecting me to jump and say, oh, great. Like I would want someone, and that's me just being a stickler. I would want someone who would do a little bit of homework before that to convince me, because they're still trying to sell, they're still trying to convince me that that's, exactly the decision I want to make. And obviously I like their work or else I wouldn't even have mentioned this, but can they come in and sort of share with me? I've been giving this some thought. And then I think for the person asking it, it'd also be interesting to see if someone came back and the boss came back and said, we can't make that work. Does the person who, needs the $35,000, can they move up to that in 6 months with some key deliverables or metrics that they meet? And I don't know enough about the job to know how they could measure it. But are there ways that they could get by with 30,000, knowing that they could get to 35,000 in 6 months or a year or whatever, and sort of building that into perhaps an agreement with the boss might be also another way to just think about it a little bit. It's a tough one, and I do agree. You sort of got to own it. If you have to make the 35, then you have to make the 35. Yeah. But how do you really make someone feel good about that decision, especially depending on the size and not knowing enough about the position? Is that a comparable rate? And perhaps they're getting you for a steal with 35 too.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a good point. I think I agree with like 80% of what you just said. but absolutely doing their homework and finding out what does that position pay in comparable institutions, and you can get that information by calling around, or there are salary surveys out there. Most of the state associations, including Ann, has a salary survey that you can ask them to take a look at. Most organizations pay for them too, because they want to be able to prove to their board that they're paying people the same general rates that everybody else is paying. So I agree with that part of it. So as a hiring manager,
Yes.
one of the things that I would put on first of all, we always, when we would post a new position, we would always say, this is the salary range for this position. We don't pretend. We don't say salary commensurate with experience. We don't say, generous benefits or any of that nonsense. We're very honest about this is the range. It's between these two numbers. And then the second thing we do is when we ask people like, how much do you expect to make? And we make sure that those two numbers are compatible with each other. So if the salary range for this position is 25 to 45 and you're asking for 35, you're great. You're in the range. And if you say you want 35 and I really like you as an employee and I want you to come work for me, I'm going to offer you 35. I'm not going to try to lowball you and bring you in at 25 because that's the bottom of my range because, maybe you'll grow for it. Because as a hiring manager, what I want is when you take this job, I want you to be excited about it. I want you to walk in going, oh my gosh, I just got the coolest job working for the most amazing organization and they're paying me what I asked them to pay me. Compare that to, I just got this job. It's an awesome organization, but I'm not getting quite the amount of money that I wanted, so I'm still sort of looking and seeing if there's something else out there that I want to do. So, I would much rather exceed somebody's expectations when it comes to salary and make them a really enthusiastic employee when they walk in the door and not try to nickel and dime them out of 10 grand over a year. Because 10 grand over a year is not that much money, And if your nonprofit's doing well, you should be trying to pay your employees as much as you can possibly pay them within the whatever the boundaries of your nonprofit finances allow. If you're doing really well, you should be able to reward your employees. From the inside the nonprofit walls, that's a really popular opinion. Outside nonprofit walls, that is an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to own it.
So here's an interesting caveat to that. I mean, they talk about, are they going to be an employee, like a paid salaried position or a consultant? And I think those then become two different things to consider, right?
Yeah.
So then you're going consultant, you've got many more taxes and things you're responsible for, and then you've got to back into the expense of, all of the stuff to be a consultant, right? Or to be set up as a consultant to do that. So I'm just sitting here also thinking, being really crystal clear, and the fact that if you're really a consultant doing a full-time employee's job, there's some risk in that for at least the employer for doing that. So I think there's some other layers here that I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get into it. But I think
Right.
There's some advice to say be cautious of whether it's consultant or salaried.
Yeah. That's a good point. Neither Stacey nor I are giving you advice that you should follow. Just remember that. So if it all goes horribly wrong because you listen to us, it's not our fault.
Yeah. We don't want the blame.
Nor it's not the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits' fault either.
No,
so,
it's
yeah.
not. We are not lawyers.
Right. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in to Nonprofit Everything. For Stacey Wedding, I'm Andy Shurick. Please check out the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. Their webpage is alliancefornevadanonprofits.com. If you have any questions, there's a podcast button. Click the podcast button and then ask us a question there. That'll get to us, and we'll try to answer those in future episodes. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.